Wow, suddenly got quiet. So we have about what looks like 2 minutes, but I guess we can go ahead and kind of get started. Why not? Who wants to start now? All right, let's go. Okay, so we're going to start a little early. This talk is about cultivating capability. Can you guys hear me okay in the back, by the way? Good. Okay. So my name is Joey Spooner. I am an accredited Kanban trainer and coach. I'm also a Kanban management professional. How many Kanban management professionals do we have in the room? Show of hands. All right, so some of you will know a little bit about what I'm talking about. The other folks here who haven't gotten the KMP will be introduced to some new things today. So I want to talk about my company. I work for this company. I'm not the CEO. I'm just an employee. But we've been using Kanban since 2016. And I want to share my story of how we actually have used it, how we've made sense of it. So this company is TriTech Enterprise Systems. We're a small business based right outside of here in Maryland. Any local DC folks? Handful? Hyattsville is where we are at. Did you file your taxes this year? Right? Maybe it's more of a show of hands of who didn't file their taxes, right? If you did, I'm sorry, you probably cried like I did. You're like, oh my goodness. But when you filed your taxes, it went through an e-file system probably. When e-file operates, that's our people behind it watching it 24/7. It's a lot of fun, late night watching it. To give you an idea of how much processes through that system, if it's down for a minute, they lose $7 million. So it's a big deal, right? About tax season prime time, it's about $7 million a minute on average. So we've been in business for 17 years and counting, actually longer at this point. Our business accounts for pretty much, we do government at about 60%, we do state government at about 35%, and we finish with commercial at 5%. And those numbers are changing a little bit as time goes on, but we're looking at about, mostly government work is what we do. Now we've been able to survive through some pretty tough times. Imagine your entire company, like your customers saying, sorry, we're closed for business, and we're not going to ask for anything from you, and we're not going to pay you. But you still have to pay your employees. And imagine that 60% of your business is government. So when you go through a shutdown, that's what happens. And we had that happen so far in 2013 and 2019, and we also survived the 2008 recession. So there were some really hard times. Now the company itself, we do the typical thing that a lot of companies here in DC do. We do IT consulting, we do project and program management, we do some network infrastructure stuff, some data management things, something called systems integration where you tie things together, information assurance, which is making sure the information is actually in good shape, and then last but not least, where my heart is, Kanban coaching and training. Some of the highlights for what we've done that I consider to be really cool is a cutting-edge federal data API system that was in support of the prior administration's request for releasing data to the public. This is all the data. So for example, goodness gracious, I'm trying to think of a good example now. One that pops into mind was the Department of Labor. They had a child labor relations division that actually tracked all of the violations for child labor laws throughout the world. And that data was made and still is made available freely through this API technology. So if you wanted to see like what are the child labor violations for a place like Russia, you could actually find out what categories, what kind of work was going on there. That was kind of fun. We also do SAP implementations, quite a few. Now we are what's referred to as a hub zone business. Don't worry about that. If you're in the government space, you know what we do. That means we're a disadvantaged business, basically. And we're also what's referred to as CMMI Dev 3. Does anyone know what CMMI stands for? Should show of hands? Okay, good. We got that CMMI Dev 3 using Kanban. So this was writing software, developing things with software, high quality type things, and we did this while using the Kanban method. We never aimed for CMMI level 3. We were just doing Kanban. We got audited, and they said, holy cow, this thing's like way condensed, really compressed, very useful for us. So small tidbit there, that's really fun. Now, our actual company mission is this. So we're committed to increasing competitive advantage. So at that very beginning of that message, we are about commitment. And that is a tough place to be if you really want to commit and follow through on some of these objectives. Innovation, research, emerging technologies. This is pretty, high-level stuff to try to achieve as a small business. But that's where we are right now as a business. Now, the capabilities of this company that I'm talking about here, we have some internal ones. That's my focus of my talk today. Proposals and sales delivery, finance, contract operations, recruitment, human resources, and then this coaching and training stuff, right? None of this is technology. Zero technology here, folks. This is all about delivering services to people, either internally or externally to the business. Now, the way we got into Kanban, you may have seen that just a little bit before, was to use it on this contract here at the Department of Labor, and it worked. We didn't just go in and say, let's flip the switch for Kanban. We actually said, hey, let's try a little bit of this, let's try a little bit of that. So for those of you who are KMPs, you probably realize that we're talking about visualizing the work, limiting how much we do, managing that limit, and that's a hard thing to do. And then we go on from there to do more. But ultimately, we did it on this project, and it delivered over time, more and more. Now, there's a full story to this. I talked about this in 2017. That's the address for it if you want to look it up. I recommend it. It's a fun story. So what we discovered when we did this on this project was an 80% improvement without changing anything. Now, we didn't change how the software development activities went about. We did tinker with that as we wanted to evolve, but ultimately, the team said, this is how we're going to operate, and we said, okay, let's work with that. There was a 90% improvement for our government service as well. Government service really manages the contract, they manage the financial aspects of the project. They're separate from the software development team. And when they used it, and this is non-IT in this case, they got a 90% improvement. When I'm talking about improvement, I'm talking about a reduction in the number of days to get something done. So the fun part to this is, if it's an 80% improvement, that was something like 55 days to 11 days. That's how far down it went. So if you're trying to account for work in an environment and you say, okay, well, how much is your average cost to run this team per day? You can start to attach that to the work that's in process and suddenly start to develop a very clear picture of how much money is sitting there waiting to go out the door. How long are we waiting for this work to get done? So to bring that down from 55 days to 5 days or 11 days in this case, that's a big savings of time and money. Big deal. So that's what we discovered on the government side, right? A rather quick CMMI ML Dev 3 kind of thing here. Our president, Randy, said, maybe we should do this for the corporate services. This thing seems really useful. It doesn't have a framework approach, it just has a method approach. So, in 2016, we decided to try Kanban internally with TriTech. Late 2016, he said, come on over here, let's try this at our business and see what it can do for us. And we were growing at the time, so we thought, this is a cool idea. So we used something called analog Kanban, which, like Marisa said earlier, all this is about is visualizing it with sticky notes and putting it on the wall. There's a huge effect to that to say, how much are we actually trying to do, and what does that look like? And that's kind of how it shaped up initially. On the left side was what I would refer to as a proto-Kanban. On the right side, a little bit more of a real Kanban system. Some limits are in place on the right side. And we also put our policies down here. I mean, this is informal stuff. I mean, this is a multi-million-dollar business, and we're saying, how do we make decisions? What are the rules behind this? That's what started that. Simple sticky notes with, okay, I think it's ready when, or I think we can start it when. That's all that's up there. Now, along with this, we were pretty adamant about training. So all of our employees got KMPs. They got trained on how to manage their own systems, how to advance the designs. Good stuff. And you can see in the background there, we were definitely pulling apart different types of work and exploring how that work went through the environment at TriTech. And it kind of looked like this. We had these rows set up to describe, different areas of the business. We had some sense of what was optional, kind of selecting something at some point when we were ready to work on it. And then we had the 0 to 100% thing. I love the 0 to 100% measurement for progress of work because that's a great place to start from. Then we'd have some sense of QA, and eventually we'd get it done. This was very informal, but it was the first attempt at tracking and managing some of the work that we had. The fun part was when we actually changed that around and said, okay, let's talk about classes of service And let's see what we can do to talk about having a standard rate of delivery. Now, we have a lot of fixed dates in a contracting business. A lot of due dates are very important. And at this point, we start to say, how can we break this apart so we can make sense of how many fixed dates, how many standards, how many expedites? Now, keep in mind, I could tell you this is complex, magical formula stuff for the WIP limits, but we just said, okay, how many people do we have here? We have 8. Okay, what's 8 times 3? 24. Okay, that's a pretty good place to start from. We'll start from 24 and bring it down from there for our WIP limit. You know, no more than 3 things per person was our way of defining our WIP limit. By the way, when I say WIP limit, for those who are not into Kanban yet, that's a work in progress limit. That means how much are we going to work on? No more than X number of things. So what we did beyond this was we would take, for example, the recruitment piece of work, and we expanded that. You saw the analog board there. That is actually what we did with the recruitment tickets. So we take the recruitment tickets and we say, okay, let's take those now and break them apart and expand them. What types of recruitment work are we really talking about? So when we first started, we just said, okay, who's doing what? Oh, I'm doing recruitment, I'm doing finance and operations, I'm doing this. Okay, you get this color, you get this color, you get this color. Start tracking your work. That's all we need you to do for now. Eventually, one person, one service at a time, basically, we said, okay, now let's pull that apart. They're all the same color, but are there different types of work in this? And that's what led to this analog board for different types of recruitment work. And it looked a little bit like this. So for recruitment, they said, oh, we actually have contracts that we support, and we have proposals. Okay, good. Now we have a better sense of what you're doing. And they had a really more complicated way of doing things. They wanted to do selection, strategizing, sourcing, screening, interviewing, offering, and onboarding people first day of the job. That was when it was done. Now this is what they're telling me that they want to do. From a systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban, I'm allowing them to tell me what they think the process should be, letting them define the steps in their work. I'm tracking that visually for them. Well, ultimately they are, but I had to help them define that into a board. So we end up with a thing like an expedite, an urgent, and a standard. That's how they want it to be as far as class of service. It made sense to me. Now, eventually, we moved this over to a Kanban that was digital. We're not a wealthy company. We can't afford the cutting-edge stuff right now, but we can afford a $10 a month package, which is what this is, which is Jira. And in our digital solution, we had something really nice. We could actually take our boards, for example, put them into columns here, and start to track our work. Nothing too fancy. But when we moved to digital, we found some drawbacks, which caused us to do a little bit more work. And the reason we did this was we had to remain in compliance with that CMMI thing that you saw there earlier. So for CMMI, they require a little bit more documentation, a few more artifacts. So what we did was we said, okay, well, we need a way to visualize our policy without being redundant. And if you guys have used different types of technology, you get those prompts sometimes to say, don't forget to do this, don't forget to do that, with some of the technology that you use. Eventually you go, yeah, whatever. I forget that, whatever. That's what I refer to as policy blindness. So when you're actually ignoring the policies because you're so used to seeing the prompt for the policy or seeing it hang out for a while, you just forget that it's there. That's not so good. So we needed a way to visualize something without constantly reminding people in a way that they would just forget, basically, or ignore it. And we also needed a way to introduce the way the service works to new people, especially on the technology side. And we ended up creating this idea of a quick reference in a guidebook. So I'm not a proponent of this, but this is what we did to remain compliant. So we have this idea of a proposal for service references. I'm sorry, a service reference proposal, service, complex there. We also have a little guidebook that explains how we operate it, what are the routines we go through, what are the policies for it again, and it looks a little something like that. Now, I don't recommend you do this. It's just something we had to do in our environment. So when we got through and we created these services, or as we were really creating them, I guess I should say, using static, we had this need to say, okay, what are the goals for capability? And one goal that Randy had mentioned, who was the president, said, okay, I need 3 submissions per month. If we're really going to remain competitive in the environment, I need about 3 proposals submitted per month to the US government. Okay? That's about one submission every 10 days. Has anyone, can I see a show of hands, anyone who's ever done a government proposal? All right, you know how crazy that sounds. That's insane. The average proposal takes about $20,000 worth of effort. It's anywhere between 25 and 100 pages long, and you have to describe how you're going to manage stuff. You're going to describe how you're going to staff stuff. You have to manage, you have to describe how you're going to cost stuff out. It's literally like setting up a startup. It is so much fun if you look at it like that. If you don't look at it like that, you will cry. You will absolutely go home and just cry because it's very painful, intensive work. So that was a challenge, was to set up a system and a service that would actually support 3 proposals every month. That means that there's demand on these other services that we were just talking about here. So if I build a proposal, I need to have people. If I build a proposal, I need to have finance and operations come back with analytics on what it will take to run this and how can we run it at a profitable level. So there's a lot that goes on. Remember, this has to happen in 10 days. One every week for about 3 a month. That's a lot to ask of people. So, oops, little bug in my slide here. What's behind this? I'm going to fix this right now because I don't like this. Sorry, guys. There we go. What's worth noting here is how we measure that capability. So 3 proposals a month, what does that look like? Now, we got into a geeky time. We actually used some analytical tools. We looked at, okay, what is the scatter plot of this? Each one of those dots represents how many days something took. In this case, proposals. So on average, you can see how we're more at the bottom. And at that bottom is like the number 24, 16 and 24. Right? So we didn't have one per week. We actually had one that would take 24 days on average. That means planning ahead really far in advance, pulling together work, getting things prepared, lead time, basically. So we have a number of proposals that are landing below the 85% mark at about 24 days. That's super exciting to us. We're starting to analyze ourselves, starting to analyze our delivery rates. And we also have this idea of things like stability. So in the bottom left corner of this picture, you'll see things like arrival rate, throughput, and web page. And for us, that mattered because that told us how frequently are we pulling in something new, a new proposal, how frequently are we delivering that, and then how long does it take us to really get that thing done. And as you can see there, it's 72 days, 49 days, 48 days. Long time, not 10 days. So that helped us to figure out more and more that we had to do a lot of planning up front, a lot of preparing up front, but still, it's tricky. And the key question here from the business perspective is, can you deliver these proposals? We're not trying to deliver highly performant services. We're trying to say, did we actually meet our goals? The way we measured this was we actually had little service delivery reviews where we talked about how are we doing as a business. Simple metrics, right? Nothing fancy here. We have a simple goal, we deliver or we don't, and then how do we modify ourselves to actually get back to that goal? And as you'll see here, for example, proposal starts off with -2 per month, not so great. Later on, we get to 3. It's a battle. I mean, this is not easy stuff. Like I said, 3 proposals a month, lots of paperwork, lots of documentation, lots of analysis that has to go on. Hitting 3 per month is like achieving, like Marissa was talking about. You have a goal, you're stretching to that goal. This was a stretch. When you make that stretch, you feel so good. But there are months where you don't make that stretch. That's what this looks like right here. So some months for 2017, we were able to knock it out of the park. June was insane. So was April. March was a rough month. So as you can see here, this isn't like a black and white thing where suddenly we attain a level and we maintain that level of performance. It all depends on the environment and what we could achieve. Now, the KMPs in this room know about the cadences. The cadences are basically like meetings in the Kanban world, and they're really meant to have conversations around certain topics. In this case, every 2 weeks, we'd have what's called a service delivery review. We would look at that proposal service, that recruitment service, the finance and operations service, and like you saw in that little chart there earlier, we're talking about how are these guys delivering? What can we do to help them out? That was always a conversation we would have. It wasn't like, oh, these guys are sucking wind, they stink. You could say that, But honestly, the better conversation was, do you need some help? We also did what's called a risk review. We'd look at, how many things are delayed? Why are they delayed? What are the common patterns of delay that we see? In our case, sometimes it was the government, sometimes it was Randy, our president, sometimes it was financial people who wouldn't come back quickly enough with answers. And so that would actually cause certain things to fail and other things to just be delayed a little longer than we'd like them to be. But we identified these patterns, and that really helped us to figure out how to improve our throughput rates over time. Now, we also did an operations review where we looked at the overall array of services and said, are they operating well? Who needs help? How do we change things? So in this case, those policies you saw there earlier, those policy blindness issues, we'd find those pretty quickly showing up, especially on the recruitment side. The recruitment side would say, oh, we're going to do this, 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 and this to recruit somebody. And then a month later, wow, you guys didn't really do that, did you? So do we need to modify this? Do we need to take those policies out, or do we need to change them? Those are the kind of conversations that we would have. So in 2017, we had all staff trained on Kanban. We had Kanban systems built. We had 8 people total. We had 5 services identified. All of them created using static. I felt good about myself, right? Capabilities defined and measured. Really good place to end the year. So we're on our way to achieving our mission, right? Woohoo! We are set for growth. We think we're going to launch this baby up, and we're just going to keep going. But then this guy shows up. And he does this thing. He goes, shh, right? And you're like, why do we need to calm down at the end of the year? Why is that necessary? And we have shift, something I like to call shift. And in this case, we had a number of things that happened in our company right after this that I'll tell you about. And that caused us to keep certain things, but other things did not stay around. And I love this quote by Darwin, right? Slight variations preserved natural selection. I love it because variation is not something that you can plan out. Variation is something that happens to you. And you have to figure out, can I hold on to that? Can it really stick with us, or does it not? I find this to be a common problem, by the way, with our policies. We have these policies, we say, oh, these are so good, we want to do this, and you try to achieve it, and guess what? You don't. Those are not going to stick with you. You have to evolve past those things. So in 2018, we had some turnover. So in 2017, our recruiter moves to a closer role, close to home. Totally makes sense. The recruiter wants to get out. The quality management person moves over to another role for a CMMI consulting firm. She loves CMMI, wants to do more CMMI. No problem. In 2017 of October, our secondary proposal developer moves to a new employer. And in November, our primary proposal developer moves to a contract role, better suits her work-life balance. She has a parent to take care of, that happens. So now she's taking care of the parent, needs to work on a contract where she can work remotely, no problem. And then 2018, our HR specialist moves to a new role, right? Well, that's June of 2018, so that's a little off there at this point. But mostly in 2017, we have a ton of things that happen where people just leave for good reasons, right? We're not trying to get them out of their business. They just leave because they find other opportunities. As this happens, our president's kind of sitting here thinking, what happens if we don't rehire these guys? Because he likes what he sees coming out of Kanban. He says, you know what, this thing's kind of working well for us. We have a back and forth struggle and success. Can we sustain it without hurting our capability? It's a small business. He's the president. He can make crazy decisions like this. He also asked, can we make it easier to operate our Kanban system? So if we get rid of some people, in this case, if they leave, in this case, I should say, what happens? If we change the configuration of our business and allow it to remain with fewer people, what will happen to these Kanban systems? And what will we sacrifice? The big question was, can we deliver with the same amount? Can we deliver the same amount with fewer people? That's a hard question to ask. Remember, one proposal every week, going from 8 people now to 3. Can we pull this off? So in our second year, we changed the way we worked. We had to. We had all these beautiful services and no one there to support them. So we decided, let's change this up. We now have the financial and operations service We still have the proposal service, and we still have the commercial Kanban service. Now with 3 people and occasional support from the outside as needed. So this wasn't a major decision to make, but it was a sacrifice we decided to make to see what would happen. And we ended up with something like this. That was a nutty year. That's amazing to get through that much work and deliver that much. My wife, who's in the room, knows all about it. Some days I'd come home and I'd feel like I just got through like a racetrack. It was so intense. We actually did deliver almost every month, and on average it was about 3 per month. That was hard. So this was an experiment of a grand scale, I think, for us to see what would happen. So, what would happen if we don't rehire these positions? What was the result for us in this case? We saved some bucks. That's always good for a small business. The best part was it was fewer lines of communication, going from 8 people down to 3. And it was very obvious who would be the leader for certain things. There wasn't a discussion. There wasn't politics about it. It was who didn't want to be the leader in some cases, I think, because we always had lots on our plate. So can we sustain the pace of these services without hurting our capability, right? That's hard to do. And the answer is yes and no for us. What we learned was what we picked would allow us to either keep the pace or hurt the pace. So we had to be really critical about what we selected. So in this case, if we found something that was super attractive, we wanted to go for it, guess what? We don't have the capability for it. And I would say even to this day, we still are listening to that and trying to find the balance for this. How many times have you gone to a store and you said, you know what, I really want that thing, and then you look at your bank account and you go, I want that thing, but my bank account's saying don't do it. But then you have the credit card, and your credit card says, you know what, let's stretch this a little bit and try and do that. That's the constant conversation we have there. Can we stretch ourselves a little bit further? Can we do this other thing that we want to do, or is it going to really hurt us? Cause us to slow down for a little while to catch up because it took so much energy out of us. Now, can we make it easier to operate the Kanban systems? That was an easy yes. And what happened was a lot of policies got dropped because suddenly they didn't matter. We didn't have as many people. We didn't need to coordinate as much. It was pretty clear what the policies were, and it was very obvious what it needed to be in place, what needed to stay around. So we took that, we made it easier. We also made the system design a lot easier. Now, in terms of sacrificing opportunity, how many of you have actually experienced this with your Kanban systems where you have to start saying, not yet, we can't do that yet, or it's not ready for us to do that? Anyone do that? Yeah. Those are fun, yeah. Double hands, I like that. So this is where you actually have to start saying, wait, we can't do as much as we want, even though our brains say, yeah, go, 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 let's do it. We have to start saying, wait a minute, can we really afford it? For a president who wants to grow a company, that's a fun conversation to have. Let me tell you, to say, yeah, we could do that. Here's what it's going to do for us if we try and tackle this 5th thing on top of these other 4. So for example, if we want to do 3 proposals a month, can we really achieve that and do these other auxiliary things that you need to do for other proposals that are coming up? That's a hard task to achieve. So making that decision is awfully hard to do. Now, in terms of our cadences, we still talked about those things, right? We still had the service delivery review every 2 weeks, talking about how we were performing as a set of services. We had our risk reviews. We had our operations reviews, still following along. But then we said, oh, we're actually getting feedback now on our proposals. So when you work with the US government, they like to take their time. There is no joke about that. Feedback on proposals in 2018 would take an average of 9 months. Can you imagine that? If you're in the product development arena and you get the feedback on the product out in the marketplace, you get that maybe every day or every hour or 2 if you're lucky. For us, we submit this thing, $20,000-ish of investment to submit it, and it takes 9 months for us to know if we even got it, right? If it's even decent. That was the nature of the business. So that actually came into our picture later in 2018. We actually started getting feedback on all these proposals we had submitted. And we had some consequences and benefits of making these decisions. So like I was saying earlier, we have pressure to manage with fewer people. went from 8 to 3 people. At that point, quality starts to become a really weird thing. Sometimes quality is important, sometimes it's not. And the hardest part was making decisions around what to do. Now, the benefits of this, as you guys have probably experienced in your own personal lives, fewer lines of communication equals shorter conversations, you're more up to speed, and the priorities are more obvious. But again, making decisions to limit commitments is very hard to do. Now, one of the things that happened around 2018 for us was we actually started having grown-up conversations. So prior to 2018, we would talk about our services, but we wouldn't talk about the business. We would have the operations review and talk about kind of the business is doing okay, but not really get into the meat of the business. Mid-2018 and on, we actually got into those conversations, which was superb. So in the case of 2018, as we started growing up and having more grown-up conversations, we were talking about revenue, staff, customers, contracts, those goals in relationship to the services. That was fun. So now we're emphasizing transparency towards the corporate goals, not just the targets. You know, as a service, you can say, look, you're hitting a 3-point goal, right? You're achieving these amazing metrics. You're always delivering on time. You're always reliable. It's the wrong thing. We don't need that anymore. We don't need you to actually deliver that frequently. We need you to deliver the right kind of thing. So it got more to a feedback loop, which was awesome. And we're also talking more and more about fitness criteria for our business. So for our customers' needs, what was it that they really needed? This was the first time where we started taking the services, the business goals, and sort of what the customer might need and having that conversation, late in 2018. Now, in this case, you can see we had some failure because we went from 8 people to 3 people. Remember, we're moving fast, trying to get proposals done. Quality is the one thing we might sacrifice. So in some cases, what we wrote wasn't right. The government was like, what are you thinking? That's no way. We're never going to do that technically. That doesn't make any sense. And we also tried some experiments, having people available for quick returns on these proposals to get them into the proposal really fast. Same with content. And sometimes those things did not work out right. And in some cases, too many commitments at once. And on the commercial Kanban side, right, where I work, we had major problems there at times. Courses didn't succeed. Sales didn't succeed. Marketing didn't succeed, right? These are things that actually helped us to learn what it was that we needed to do to grow up and actually deal with the market that we really have and serve it well. And then that would inform our services and what we needed to change there. So this is allowing us to grow up by getting the feedback we really need and not looking internally, which is a big deal for us as a company. And that also tells us a little bit more about our commitments. So in the case of proposals, we love to look at proposals in our business. We love to look at them coming out from the government, and we see these things and they look amazing, right? I want that. I want to write for this proposal. I want to write for that proposal. The trick is we have to make critical decisions about where we have the best chance at winning proposals. So that means doing more homework early on, up front. How many of you guys have actually written software without requirements? Anyone? Yeah, about half the room or more, yeah. That's kind of like that. That's what that is. That's what it feels like. We're running through, we're writing software. What are we building? I don't know, but let's keep building it. It's beautiful. It's new language. Let's write it. Awesome. I love it. Awesome diagram. Looks great. What does this mean? I don't know, but let's keep writing it, right? And somewhat, that's the same problem here. So in some cases, you got to say, wait a minute, let's slow down and figure out what in the heck are we doing here? Because it's really great to write out 3 proposals a month. It feels awesome, right? I'm in shape, right? I'm beefing up my upper body. But then suddenly it's like, oh, I have to write a 100-mile bike ride. I'm not ready for that. But that's what the government wants. So now we have to kind of change gears and look at things a little differently. So we wrapped 2018 with capability intact. That is some hard stuff to do. 2018 was tough, but we ended in December thinking, we got this. This is definitely working out right. We feel like we finally got some sense of where we are, how to organize ourselves. We know where we want to go as a business. 2019 should be a piece of cake. We should crush the first quarter, no problem at all. And we're wrapping up December kind of going, what's that cloudy thing? And this guy shows up. And he's saying, shh. right? And shift happens again. And this is the 2019 shutdown. Boy, oh boy. We were thinking, it'll be a week of shutdown, maybe 2 weeks max. But as we saw things play out the way that they did, reversing direction and changing gears and, politics aside, I look at this from a simple time and economics point of view. There's so much delay built into this kind of conversational style. It doesn't deliver quickly. It takes a month or more for this kind of stuff to be hashed out. Sometimes less, but in this case, a month. So in our third year, this government shutdown happens. These are all the events. This is like half of the events that took place in the month of January, the back and forth around this kind of conversation, right? How many times have you been in a planning meeting where you're replanning and replanning and replanning and replanning before you even say yes to something, right? That's what this is about. So in the entire month of January, the government's planning and replanning how it wants to operate itself. In the meantime, they say to us, sorry, no money. So for us, we're looking at zero revenue. We're looking at, well, at least on the government side, delayed revenue, I should say. But this really impacts us because on the proposal side, everything is quiet. We can't deliver proposals. The government's actually closed its doors. So this led us to think more critically about our fitness for purpose, right? Our fitness for our customers and what they need. And this led us to think a little bit more critically about, okay, well, wait a minute, what can we do to serve the customer that's commercial a little bit more? Anyone who's in business, who runs their own business, realizes they need to diversify themselves to remain a business, basically, and not lock into one customer. So now we're exploring more of the commercial and state government markets, and we're finding that commercial and state government have a few criteria that better fit with us. That doesn't mean that we won't keep going after and working with the U.S. government, but the U.S. government has quite a few fitness criteria that they want you to achieve. And this leads us to our third year, capabilities. So remember that thing I showed you about in 2018 where we got that 9-month feedback loop kind of kicking in? This is what happens when the government shuts down. So even though it shut down and started back up in February and you think, okay, the lights are back on, the reality is things are still moving slowly and catching back up. Because powering down an entire enterprise of 20,000 people and then powering it back up takes time, especially with the workload that they're trying to manage. So in this case, delay happens when shift happens for us. So in 2019, cool things happened, right? What is this? 2016, 2017, 2018, now we're into 2019. So about 3 years, really 2 years, but almost 3 now. We took our conversations that we used to have as separate conversations, these cadences, where we talked about operations and risk and service delivery, and we said, you know what, we're 3 people in a room, we're comfortable being honest with each other, why don't we just bring this all together into one meeting in about an hour and a half? So now we take it from an outside-in kind of perspective. We say, what are the business goals that we want to achieve? What are the services doing? And what do we need to do to address that? What do we see coming in the market that we need to address? So in this case, we can have a really good, healthy conversation about where the business is, where it's going, and how we want to tailor our services to achieve our goals. This is cool, right? This is a small business thing. Once we start to grow as a business, once we get beyond 8 people again, this is going to be broken out into other conversations that then are like a separate operations review, a separate service delivery review. It'll change. But right now, this is a really fun conversation to have at a small business level. How many of you guys are small businesses, by the way? I'm curious. Okay, so some of you are. Yeah. So you probably understand this. The bigger ones, you're probably wishing you probably had this kind of conversation, I imagine. And you'll notice here that we actually added in a 4th little dot up here on this picture. We were 3, now we're 4. We're adding back in that CMMI thing because we realize it still has value in the marketplace for government-related needs. So now we're letting our fitness goals kind of help us figure out where our business targets should be, and then from there, where our services should be. Kind of a cool combination of things that happens in only about an hour and a half. Now, as a company, we have evolved over time. And we have reached a point where we started off with defining capability. How many of you guys have actually used static in here? Handful, probably? Yeah. So you realize sometimes when you're using static, you start to get the sense of, okay, this is what we have, this is what we do, this is where we are. That's a good place to be. But what we found was we have a full inventory of who we are as a set of services, but what really mattered was, what do we really need? So we got this information from doing static. We built these services. Now we have an internal focus on making sure these services run well. Later on, what made sense was, okay, how many of these services do we need? Are these policies right? Can we do less with what we, can we do more with what we have? Can we do more with less, or keep it the same with less people? Which meant we had to increase our skill liquidity. So when we're talking about skills across the business, 3 people going from 8 to 3, suddenly those 3 have to learn to do a lot more, and they have to be way more flexible. I know way more about government proposals than I ever wanted to know in my life because I got more involved with that. And at the same time, my company learned way more about commercial business than they probably ever thought they'd need to know about because I did more commercial work. Now we're at a point where I would say that we have reached what I call targeted capability. So how do we take our capability, how do we aim for a target, how do we make those 2 things lock in? This is 2+ years into doing Kanban. This is not something that happens overnight. I wish it could, it'd be awesome, but it wouldn't be learned and it wouldn't be earned in this case. So we're looking at our external needs, our internal capabilities, trying to find our true strengths here as a business, and then doing the design work around our Kanban systems, using the demand of our customers to tell us what they need, rather than us looking inside and saying, okay, this is exactly what we need to do. So some of you guys might be kind of curious. You might be like, this sounds really complicated. It is. I wish it wasn't, but it is kind of complicated work for me. And you may want to get an experience of what it feels like, a taste of it. So there's this game, or simulation, I really should say, that I've created with my colleague, Trent Home. And it's an idea of thriving, surviving, or dying, right? That's coming up later today. So if you want to know how this feels, this is an experience of risk reviews, operations reviews, and doing it in sort of a fast-paced decision-making environment. Right? You have to make decisions for running a multi-million-dollar business. And some of these use cases that are in the game come from real life, from where I've consulted and done some work. So you and a handful of team members will sit down and you'll run a multi-million-dollar business, and either you're going to thrive, survive, or die. And let me tell you, it's painful. I recommend you bring tissues to the game if you come, because you'll probably feel the pain that I feel on a daily basis or monthly basis. So now, that kind of wraps up a little bit of what I wanted to tell you guys. I wanted to know if you had questions about how this works or examples to share. Anyone feel like they've had this kind of experience before in their lives? Anyone run into similar situations? Oh, yes, sir. Yep.
So when you had the reduction in team size, what kind of resistances did you run into for people maybe moving into additional responsibilities or learning different skill sets?
Great question. That was interesting. As people left and we didn't refill those positions, our company is really cool. I have to admit, our president's probably one of the smartest people I've worked for from an emotional intelligence point of view. So he recognized, he didn't think it would be fair to say, well, now, recruiter, you need to do the job of the CMMI person or the CMMI specialist. At the same time, he looked at me and said, do you think you can help out with that? And usually our conversations are more along the lines of who can help out with this thing that we need to have done? Is it still valuable to do it? So for us, it was a matter of looking around the room and saying, okay, can anyone help out? And usually there was a deaf silence for a few minutes there where everyone went, oh man, I don't want to. Okay, I'll do it, right? Or it would be sort of like, hey, I've really been wanting to play with this. I'm really wanting to do it. The fun part was we had, a chance to experiment and learn, and some sense of, I think, permission giving from the president to say, let's give this a try. We do expect this to be screwy at times, so we expect some failure to come out of it, but we want to give it a shot. And so when people felt like they didn't get criticized for that kind of experimentation where they tried something that normally they wouldn't do, that was kind of a door that opened up for them to try it, and they felt more comfortable doing it. Anybody else? Oh, all right.
My question was, when you had the reduction in staff, did you have challenges maintaining CMMI compliance, or has that not come up yet, or do you anticipate challenges?
So I was told by our CMMI specialist that it's not compliance, it's, oh gosh, let's go back and look at this for a second, because she actually corrected this slide. She got all over me for it. She was like, you've got to get that right. Because I wrote in the slide that, let's see here, proposal, right. There was something else where it was like not compliance, but adherence to the model or something like that. They're very picky about that in the CMMI world because it's not institutionalization, it's something else now. But yeah, that was a risk that we had to take on, and we're now actually going through a pre-appraisal for another audit for CMMI compliance. And now it's fun because she took off, she got her KMP, she took off, did some really cool things, and then we said, hey, let's bring her back. And the timing was right, we brought her back. And then that's fun. Imagine that you leave a company for a year or so, and then you come back and say, what happened? And like everything's different. And you're like, what happened? You know, that's kind of the reaction we've gotten so far. So for the most part, we've remained compliant from what we can tell, or adhering to the model. But the hardest part is actually keeping up with those things. The cool part is with Kanban, you can actually keep a lot of this inherent in the model and still comply for the most part. I should say adhere. But the point is, I would say about 85% of what we do now is still matching with what we're doing with CMMI. But there's a 15% that basically slowly degraded from the business because we didn't need to do it. So as a business, we're still profitable, we're still sustainable, we're still running fine. But for CMMI purposes, we said, well, do we need to hang on to this? Do we need to hang on to that? And some of those things did drop. They will be coming back because we want to achieve another level of CMMI certification because the government likes those things. We want the government to like us. That's the fitness piece that you saw there earlier. So yeah, I would say about 85% is still intact, 15% to 20% is a little rough. Need some help. Other questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate you showing up here.